Hey everyone. I never thought I'd be the guy writing a post like this, but here we are. I'm 31M, my wife is 29F, and until recently I honestly believed we had a solid marriage. We'd been together for almost 8 years, married for 3. From the outside, we looked like one of those couples who had everything figured out, shared goals, stable jobs, and what I thought was mutual respect. But if I'm being real, the first crack showed up long before everything exploded. My wife has always had a sharp personality, confident, outspoken, sometimes brutally honest. At first I admired that. Over time, though, it started to feel more like harshness. Small arguments turned into sarcastic comments, and when I tried to talk about my feelings, she'd brush it off or say I was too sensitive. Another thing that started bothering me was how often small lies would appear. Nothing huge at first, stories that didn't quite add up, details changing from one conversation to another. If I pointed it out, she'd laugh it off or accuse me of overthinking. I convinced myself that every relationship has weird phases, that stress from work was just making things tense. Then there were sudden changes in her schedule. Late nights that came out of nowhere, new friends I'd never heard about before, and a growing distance between us. Conversations became shorter. She guarded her phone more than ever. And whenever I asked simple questions, the answers felt rushed or defensive. Looking back now, those were clear warning signs. But at the time I kept telling myself I was imagining things, because admitting something was wrong felt scarier than pretending everything was fine. And honestly, I wish I had trusted my instincts earlier, because what I discovered next completely shattered the version of my life I thought was real. So here's where things took a turn I wasn't ready for. At first it was just a weird feeling I couldn't shake. My wife suddenly became extremely protective of her phone. She used to leave it on the table all the time. Now it was always face down, always with her, even when she went to grab a glass of water. Notifications were silenced. If a message popped up while I was nearby, she'd immediately flip the screen away like it was a reflex. Her schedule changed too, and not in a gradual, believable way. One week she suddenly had extra projects. The next week she was going to late team dinners with people I'd never heard of before. Whenever I asked normal questions like, "Who's going?" or "What's the project about?" she'd answer quickly but vaguely, then get irritated like I was interrogating her. The first real red flag hit one random Tuesday night. She told me she had to stay late at work because of an urgent meeting. Something about the way she said it felt rehearsed. I didn't push it, at least not out loud, but that uneasy feeling stayed in my chest the entire evening. A few days later, I was cleaning the living room when I found a receipt tucked inside her jacket pocket. It wasn't from anywhere near her office. It was from a small restaurant across town, the kind of quiet place couples go to for long dinners. The date and time matched one of her late meetings. I remember just standing there, staring at the paper, trying to come up with any logical explanation that didn't destroy my reality. Then came another moment that really messed with my head. One night she fell asleep on the couch while watching something. Her phone lit up with a message preview, just a name I didn't recognize and a heart emoji. I didn't unlock anything. I didn't scroll, but seeing that tiny detail felt like a punch to the chest. Instead of confronting her immediately, I started noticing patterns. Same nights out, same sudden mood shifts, same defensiveness whenever I mentioned feeling distant from her. And every time something didn't make sense, there was always a new explanation, a new version of events. At that point, I still didn't have absolute proof. But deep down, I started realizing something was seriously wrong, and that my marriage might not be what I thought it was at all. After those first red flags, I started paying closer attention, not in a creepy, obsessive way, just more aware. I noticed how she'd suddenly smile at her phone and then instantly go cold when I walked into the room. How she began showering the second she got home, even when she used to just collapse on the couch with me after work. One night, everything escalated fast. She said she was going out with coworkers again. Same vague details, same defensive tone. But that evening, one of her actual coworkers, someone I had met before, randomly posted a group photo from a team dinner. My wife wasn't in it, not even in the background. That's when my stomach dropped. When she came home later, she acted completely normal, almost too normal, talking about her stressful evening, complaining about work, tossing out details that sounded rehearsed. I nodded along, but something inside me had already shifted. I realized I was starting to listen not as a partner, but like someone trying to catch inconsistencies. A few days later came the moment that changed everything. She left her laptop open on the kitchen table while she rushed out for an early meeting. I wasn't snooping at first. I was just trying to send myself a file we both used for bills. But when I opened the browser, there was a chat window already open. I froze. It wasn't just casual conversation. It was personal, intimate, full of inside jokes and messages that clearly crossed boundaries. Plans that matched her work nights. Conversations about how she needed to keep things secret so I wouldn't find out. Reading even a few lines made my hands shake. I didn't scroll for long. Honestly, I couldn't. My chest felt tight, my thoughts were racing, and everything around me felt unreal. All those little lies, all the weird behavior, all the gut feelings I had ignored, suddenly they weren't paranoia anymore. I sat there in silence for what felt like hours, staring at nothing, trying to process how quickly my life had flipped upside down. I wasn't just dealing with suspicion anymore. I was staring at undeniable proof that something had been happening behind my back for longer than I wanted to admit. And that's when I knew the next step would be confronting her. And I had no idea how that conversation was going to go. I didn't confront her right away. I needed a day just to breathe and figure out what I was going to say without completely losing control. My emotions were all over the place. Anger, disbelief, sadness, and this heavy feeling in my chest like I was carrying a secret that was crushing me from the inside. The next evening, when she came home, I asked if we could talk. She immediately looked irritated, like I had already done something wrong just by bringing it up. I tried to stay calm. I told her I'd been feeling distance between us, and that some things weren't adding up. At first she rolled her eyes and said I was being dramatic again. Then I mentioned the restaurant receipt. Her reaction was instant. Defensive, sharp, almost aggressive. She said it was just a work thing and accused me of digging through her stuff. The conversation quickly turned into her questioning my trust instead of addressing what I had found. I stayed quiet for a moment, and then I told her about the messages I had seen on her laptop. Everything changed in that second. She froze. Then came a wave of denial, saying it wasn't what it looked like, that I misunderstood, that it was just harmless conversation. When I pointed out specific details, the story shifted again. Suddenly it was just emotional, then a mistake. Then somehow it became my fault for being distant and not giving her enough attention. The more we talked, the more the truth kept moving. One moment she'd admit to something small, the next she'd minimize it or contradict herself completely. Her tone switched between cold anger and forced calmness, like she was trying different strategies to control the narrative. At one point she even accused me of invading her privacy and said my reaction was the real problem, not what she had done. Hearing that hit me harder than anything else. I remember sitting there thinking, how did we get to a place where my pain was being dismissed like it didn't matter? The conversation lasted hours, but felt like minutes. Nothing was fully resolved. There were partial admissions, half explanations, and more questions than answers. And when it finally ended, the house felt colder than it ever had before. That night, I barely slept. Because now the truth was out in the open, and I knew the hardest part wasn't the discovery, it was dealing with everything that came after. The morning after that conversation felt unreal. You know that heavy silence where even normal sounds feel loud? That's what the house felt like. She acted almost normal, making coffee, checking her phone, moving around like nothing had really changed. Meanwhile, my mind was racing nonstop. At first it was just pure shock. I kept replaying every memory from the past year in my head. Vacations, quiet evenings, random conversations, trying to figure out what was real and what wasn't. Every small lie I had ignored suddenly felt huge. Every moment of distance made sense in a way I wish it didn't. Then the anger hit. Not explosive anger where you yell and break things. More like a deep, steady burn that sat in my chest all day. I felt stupid for trusting so easily. I felt angry at the lies, at the excuses, at how quickly she had tried to turn the blame back on me during the confrontation. Simple things started triggering me. Seeing her laugh at something on her phone. Hearing her say she was busy. Even normal conversations felt fake because I didn't know which version of her I was talking to. The partner I thought I knew or the one who had been living a completely different life behind my back. But mixed in with that anger was something heavier, sadness. Not just about the betrayal, but about the loss of the future I thought we were building. The routines we had. The plans we talked about. It felt like grieving someone who was still physically in the same room, but emotionally gone. There were moments I wanted to pack my bags and leave immediately. Other moments where I sat alone wondering if somehow I could still fix things. If this was just a terrible phase we could survive. That inner conflict was exhausting. And the hardest part? She kept acting like things would just go back to normal if we stopped talking about it. No real accountability. No deep conversations. Just short apologies followed by defensiveness whenever I tried to express how broken I felt. That's when I realized the emotional damage wasn't just about what she did. It was about how alone I felt dealing with it. After the first wave of anger, something else settled in: exhaustion. The kind that makes even simple decisions feel heavy. Every conversation with her turned into a mental chess game. I kept wondering which version of the truth I was hearing that day. Some mornings she acted apologetic, almost soft, saying she wanted to fix things. By evening she'd flip back into defensiveness, reminding me that I wasn't perfect either. Those emotional swings messed with my head more than I expected. I started doubting my own reactions, questioning whether I was overreacting or if my pain was actually valid. Sleep became difficult. My mind replayed the messages I had seen and the half-truths she kept giving me. I'd lie awake imagining scenarios, conversations, timelines, trying to fill in gaps she refused to explain clearly. Even when I managed to rest, I woke up feeling tense and drained. At work, I caught myself staring at my screen without actually reading anything. Friends noticed I was quieter, but I didn't know how to explain the situation without feeling embarrassed. I felt isolated, like I was carrying a secret that was slowly eating away at my confidence. There were also moments of deep sadness, not dramatic, just quiet heaviness. I'd walk past photos of us from happier times and feel this strange mix of nostalgia and betrayal. I kept asking myself how someone who used to feel like my safest place had become the source of so much confusion and hurt. One evening, during another tense conversation, she casually joked that I needed to get over it already. That sentence hit harder than anything else so far. It made me realize that while I was drowning in emotions, she seemed impatient with the process. That was the moment I understood something important. I couldn't keep waiting for her to fully understand my pain before deciding what to do next. My healing and my future couldn't depend entirely on her reactions. And that realization slowly pushed me toward thinking about real decisions, not just emotional reactions. Up until this point, I was stuck in limbo, not fully leaving, not fully staying, just existing in this weird emotional fog where every day felt heavy. But then something happened that pushed me past denial. One weekend she told me she was going to stay with a friend to clear her head. She said we both needed space. Honestly, I agreed. I thought maybe time apart would calm things down and give us both perspective. She packed a small bag and left without much emotion, which already felt strange considering everything we had just gone through. 2 days later, a mutual acquaintance casually mentioned seeing her out in public, not alone, not with the friend she had mentioned, but with the same person from the messages. I didn't confront her immediately. I just sat there, letting that information settle in, feeling that familiar mix of anger and disbelief rise again. When she came back home, she acted relaxed, almost cheerful, like her little break had reset everything. I asked her directly how her weekend was. She repeated the same story about spending quiet time with a friend, reflecting on our relationship. The ease with which she said it, knowing what I already knew, was like a punch to the gut. That was my breaking point. Not just the betrayal itself, but the continued lies even after everything had already come to light. It made me realize that I wasn't dealing with a single mistake anymore. I was dealing with a pattern. For the first time, instead of feeling overwhelmed, I felt a strange calmness. Not peace exactly, more like clarity. I stopped trying to convince myself things would magically go back to the way they were. I stopped searching for excuses on her behalf. That night, I sat alone and thought about the past few months, the confusion, the emotional roller coaster, the constant self-doubt. And I finally asked myself a question I had been avoiding. If nothing changed, could I actually live like this long-term? The honest answer scared me, but it also gave me direction. Because I realized I was approaching a moment where I would have to make a real decision, not just survive day by day. Even after that breaking point, I didn't walk away immediately. Part of me still wanted to believe there was something left to fix. 8 years together isn't something you erase overnight. So instead of making a dramatic exit, I tried one last time to see if there was any real chance at rebuilding trust. I asked her to sit down for a serious conversation, no distractions, no sarcasm, no blaming. I told her exactly how I felt. The lies hurt more than anything else, and if we were going to move forward, honesty had to be absolute. I suggested counseling, clear boundaries, and full transparency. I was ready to do the hard emotional work if she was willing to meet me halfway. At first, she agreed quickly, almost too quickly. She said she wanted to fix things, that she didn't want to lose what we had built. For a brief moment, I felt hope again. We talked about practical steps, about giving each other space to process emotions, about slowly rebuilding communication. But within days, the old patterns started creeping back in. Small inconsistencies in her stories. Defensive reactions when I asked simple questions. Moments where she'd say she understood my pain, followed by comments that minimized it or made it sound like I was stuck in the past. One evening we tried to talk about attending counseling together. She agreed at first, then later changed her mind and said talking to strangers about our issues felt unnecessary. That shift felt like a huge step backward. It made me realize that while I was trying to rebuild from the ground up, she was already tired of the process. I found myself constantly watching her actions instead of trusting her words. Every late message, every unexplained change in mood, every vague plan reopened the same wounds. And slowly, the hope I had been holding on to started fading, replaced by a quiet understanding that effort from only one side wasn't enough to fix something this broken. That's when the question changed from "can we save this?" to "what do I actually deserve moving forward?" After weeks of trying to fix things almost single-handedly, I started noticing something scary. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was changing in ways I didn't recognize. I became quieter around friends, more anxious at home, constantly second-guessing my own thoughts. I checked my words before speaking, worried every conversation would turn into another argument or another denial from her. I realized I had stopped doing things that used to make me feel like myself. I avoided hobbies because my mind was always busy analyzing her behavior. I stopped making long-term plans because I didn't know if our relationship even had a future. My world had shrunk to monitoring tension and trying to keep emotional peace. One evening, a friend asked me a simple question: "Are you actually happy right now?" I couldn't answer immediately, and that silence told me more than anything else. I had been so focused on saving the marriage that I hadn't asked whether staying was slowly breaking me. At home, things felt colder. Conversations were shallow. She acted like the worst part was over and expected everything to go back to normal routines. Meanwhile, I was still dealing with trust issues, emotional wounds, and unanswered questions. Whenever I tried to revisit deeper topics, she'd get frustrated and say I needed to move on already. That disconnect made something click inside me. I realized healing wasn't happening. I was just learning to tolerate pain. And the more I ignored my own needs, the more invisible I felt in my own life. One night, I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the exhausted person staring back. That was the moment I admitted something I had been avoiding for months. Staying just because I was afraid of change wasn't a real reason to keep living like this. And once that realization settled in, the next step became unavoidable. I had to start thinking seriously about what leaving might actually look like. Admitting to myself that leaving might be the healthiest option felt both terrifying and strangely freeing. For weeks I had been stuck in survival mode, hoping things would magically improve. But once I accepted that I couldn't control her honesty or her choices, only my own, something inside me shifted. I started taking small steps. Nothing dramatic at first. I began reconnecting with friends I had distanced myself from. I spent more time outside the house, going to the gym, taking long walks, doing anything that gave my brain a break from constant overthinking. And slowly, I noticed a difference in how I felt when I wasn't surrounded by tension. I also began thinking practically instead of emotionally. I looked at my finances. I reviewed shared responsibilities. I started understanding what independence would actually require if I decided to leave. The more I organized these details, the less impossible the situation seemed. At home, she sensed something had changed. She asked why I seemed distant. I told her honestly that I was trying to understand what I needed moving forward, not just what the relationship needed. She reacted with a mix of irritation and sudden affection, switching between accusing me of giving up and then acting unusually nice, like she was trying to pull me back emotionally. Those mixed signals only confirmed what I was beginning to understand. My clarity was new, but the instability in our relationship wasn't. And for the first time, I stopped chasing reassurance from her. I started focusing on my own boundaries, what I would and wouldn't accept anymore. One evening, after another tense conversation that went in circles, I sat alone and wrote down a list. What staying would look like, and what leaving could offer. Seeing it on paper made everything feel real. Painful, yes, but also honest. That was the moment I stopped thinking in maybe someday things will be okay terms and started preparing myself emotionally for a decision that would change everything. Once I made that list, the fear didn't vanish. It never does at first, but it became manageable. Instead of letting it paralyze me, I used it as fuel. I began taking concrete steps toward independence, no matter how small. I opened a separate bank account, researched apartment listings, and even started packing a few things just in case. Each act was a quiet assertion. I mattered enough to plan for myself. The hardest part wasn't logistical, it was emotional. Leaving someone you've invested so much in feels like tearing a part of yourself away. I found myself replaying memories, wondering if I was being selfish, doubting my courage. But then I remembered the long nights I'd spent anxious, walking on eggshells, hoping for honesty I never received. The contrast was stark, and for the first time, I realized that wanting peace for myself wasn't selfish, it was necessary. I also leaned on people outside of the relationship. Friends who had been quiet witnesses to the struggle offered perspectives I hadn't allowed myself to hear before. Their voices reminded me that my worth wasn't tied to someone else's ability to love me consistently. Even small affirmations, a text from a friend, a shared laugh, became tiny anchors keeping me steady. By the end of that week, I could feel the shift more clearly. I wasn't just thinking about leaving anymore. I was quietly rehearsing it in my mind, imagining what life could be like when I prioritized myself. The idea of leaving no longer felt like betrayal. It felt like survival. And survival, I realized, could also mean reclaiming joy I'd almost forgotten existed. I knew the conversation was inevitable. Staying silent would have meant pretending everything was fine, and I couldn't do that anymore. One evening, I gathered my courage and told her I needed to talk. The air felt thick, like the room itself was holding its breath. I spoke slowly, carefully, trying to stay calm. I explained how I'd been feeling. The anxiety, the constant guessing, the exhaustion of always putting someone else's honesty above my own peace. I didn't attack or blame. I stated facts about my experience. At first, she reacted with defensiveness, then anger, then hurt. The cycle was familiar. But this time, I didn't try to soothe her or fix the moment. I listened, but I stayed grounded in my truth. She accused me of abandoning her, of overreacting. I admitted that leaving was scary, but I also explained that staying in a relationship where I was constantly unsettled wasn't healthy for either of us. The words felt heavy, almost foreign coming out of my mouth, but they carried a strange relief, honesty. For the first time, I noticed that she couldn't control my reaction anymore. I wasn't shrinking in fear or bending to calm her mood swings. I was present, assertive, and firm. I could see the frustration in her eyes, but I could also feel my own power growing. Saying what I needed wasn't cruel, it was necessary. By the end of the conversation, nothing had magically changed. She didn't suddenly become perfect or apologetic, but I left that night with a sense of clarity I'd never had before. I wasn't just reacting to her behavior anymore. I was taking responsibility for my own life, my own choices, my own happiness. And that made all the difference. After that confrontation, everything felt sharper. I was awake to reality in a way I hadn't allowed myself before. The idea of leaving was no longer abstract. It was approaching, and I had to be ready. I spent the next few weeks quietly preparing. I organized my belongings, separating what I truly needed from what had just been filling space. I checked my finances obsessively, making sure I had enough to cover rent, bills, and emergencies. I researched neighborhoods, potential apartments, and even small comforts that would make a new space feel like mine. Each step felt like building a lifeboat while still in stormy waters. Exhausting, but necessary. Emotionally, it was a roller coaster. I oscillated between fear, guilt, and relief. I worried about how she would react, about the loneliness, about whether I was making a mistake. And yet, each time I imagined staying, I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, the anxious, suffocating weight I had carried for so long. Preparing to leave became an act of self-preservation. I also started reclaiming small joys that had been buried. I cooked meals just for myself, went on solo hikes, and allowed myself evenings without obligation. These moments were tiny, but they reminded me of who I was outside of the relationship, someone who could exist fully without constant compromise. The hardest part, though, was the mental rehearsal. I imagined the conversations, the confrontation, the moment I walked out the door. I tried to steel myself for her reaction, for the guilt she might throw at me. And through it all, I realized something crucial. This wasn't betrayal. It was the first real act of choosing myself. The first step toward freedom wasn't just physical, it was mental. The day I finally left, the world felt both impossibly heavy and impossibly light at the same time. Packing the last box, closing the door behind me, I felt a cocktail of fear, guilt, and exhilaration I didn't know I was capable of feeling all at once. She was there, of course. Her eyes widened when she realized I wasn't coming back that night. She asked if I was sure, if there was some way to fix this. I stayed calm, repeating the truth I had practiced over and over. I needed to live for myself now. No anger, no shame, just honesty. Walking away wasn't cinematic. There was no triumphant music, no dramatic slam of the door. There was just a slow, steady step forward, a step into uncertainty, but also into possibility. And as I drove away, the tightness in my chest began to loosen, replaced by a strange, trembling kind of relief. I had chosen me, finally. The first few nights in my own space were surreal. I kept expecting the old anxiety to follow me, to seep into corners of my apartment like it had everywhere else. But slowly it didn't. I could breathe. I could think. I could exist without second-guessing every word, every action. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly coming home, to myself. It wasn't perfect. Loneliness crept in at odd moments. Memories hit like waves. But even in those moments, I knew I had made the right choice. I had taken control of my life, my happiness, and my boundaries. And that, more than anything, felt like freedom. Weeks turned into months, and each day in my own space reinforced what I had already begun to understand. Choosing myself wasn't a single moment. It was a series of decisions, small and large, that built a life I could finally call my own. I discovered parts of myself I had almost forgotten. Hobbies I had abandoned, friendships I had neglected, and even moments of quiet introspection became sources of joy and clarity. Life wasn't magically perfect. No life ever is. But it was real, and it was mine. Looking back, the hardest part wasn't leaving her. It was leaving the version of myself who tolerated the uncertainty, who ignored my needs for the sake of comfort or fear. Reclaiming that version of me was terrifying, yes, but also exhilarating. It proved that I could survive discomfort, uncertainty, and fear, and come out stronger on the other side. I learned that boundaries aren't walls to keep people out. They're a declaration of self-respect. That independence isn't loneliness, it's freedom. That love, real love, can't thrive when one person constantly compromises their own peace. Most importantly, I realized that choosing myself wasn't the end of a story. It was the beginning of a life I had the courage to live fully, without apology. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I felt like I was truly alive.